Okay. I believe we should be live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the UploadVR studio. I'm here with Thomas, the developer of Cubism.
Hello.
And we're here to talk a bit about the game and developing the game and how it's how you found it. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to check the cameras are working properly. Bear with me, guys. Just going to make sure we got the camera switching going right, guys. Give me 1 second. Okay. So, first of all, let's get started. How did you get your start in VR? What led you to kind of start VR development? What's your, history as a developer?
Sure. So my background is actually not in like computer science or game development at all. I actually come from a background in architecture. I was a practicing architect for several years until I made the switch. And it was first architecture that actually led me to move into VR. I was really fascinated by what VR could do for sort of the design process and how it could make the design and architecture a lot more human centered, because it's, instead of looking at a plan for a building from top down, you sort of look at a building from a human perspective while you design it. So I thought that was very fascinating. So in 2016, I quit my job as an architect, and I just basically did everything I could to learn VR development and sort of get into the industry. And for me, that involved going to a lot of hackathons and a lot of game jams to sort of learn from other people and start making tiny projects. And the game jams sort of stuck. So even though I sort of landed a job after about half a year of sort of learning how to develop at a startup based in New York called Inside VR, I kept making games as sort of a hobby. And then in 2017, I made a first prototype of Cubism. And I'd been sort of plucking away at it in my free time from that point on. And was able to release it last year on Quest, and I've been working on it ever since.
Yeah, so, excuse me. So, did you have any history in like game development besides VR while you were an architect, or was it just like you made this switch out of the blue kind of?
Not too much. A little bit. I was always fascinated by these sort of technologies of game engines to use in architecture. The very first time I sort of experimented with it, I think I was like in the third year of university, and we had this big apartment building that we needed to design. And at the time, Crysis had come out, that PC game?
Yeah.
And so it came with the CryEngine 2, right? And I found a way to sort of import the 3D models I was making of this building into CryEngine. And that was my first experience in sort of making these first-person walkthroughs through buildings. And I was actually presenting that project at the end of the year in Crysis. Sadly with like a big gun in my hand, because that's just the game. But it really worked. Like you didn't really get a first person perspective. And the interesting thing is when I was showing that to people outside of university, to family and friends who weren't sort of in architecture, they would give me a lot more feedback that was a lot more relevant than when I would show them scale models or plans. So that was when it first clicked, like, oh, these sort of immersive technologies can be very useful for the design process.
Yeah, okay. So, thinking a bit about Cubism specifically, I'm a huge fan of the game. I think it's definitely, I think, my personal favorite puzzle game on Quest and one of my favorite Quest games. And I've talked about it a lot. But I think what's so good about it, for those perhaps that are watching that don't know, you can get an idea of how the game works from this picture here. But basically, it's little kind of wireframe structures, and you've got to place pieces in the right combination so they all fit. Would you say that's an accurate
That's exactly what it is. It's as simple as that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite simple, but it gets quite complex and challenging with the way that
Hmm.
certain pieces will only fit in certain areas and whatnot. It takes you a while to think through some of them. The game has great hand tracking support, as you can see in that screenshot. Is it high frequency hand tracking now? I can't remember if.
Not yet. The reason it's not is that I first added support for 120 hertz, and that sort
Yeah,
of ate into my margins.
yeah, yeah.
And so the
Okay.
problem with high frequency hand tracking is it's either on or off. You can't change it at runtime.
Mm,
So I
right.
really need to do some more optimizations to get that to work. But
Yeah.
luckily,
Okay.
the gameplay is pretty slow paced. So I've seen the
Yeah.
biggest benefit of high frequency if you have really fast hand movements in your gameplay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think too the good thing about the hand tracking in Cubism is that you've got those. You can see on the far end of the screenshot there. You've got the little indicators of which parts it's tracking in terms of your connection to the piece, right? So you can go, oh, okay, I need to release
Right.
these fingers to let it go,
Right.
which
Right.
isn't always the case. But that's a really good kind of a very nice small design thing that I appreciated. So how did you I can see the influence from your history and architecture in this game because it's very
Mhm.
clean and focused on design. Could you talk a bit more about, I guess, where the idea came from and then how you
Mhm.
used your architecture background to kind of, I guess, design this kind of very simple puzzle game that seems, I think, more simple than it probably is?
Sure. Well, the inspiration mainly actually came from mobile games. I'm a big fan of minimal mobile games and minimal design in mobile games. Um, things like Mini Metro or
Yeah, I love
Trees,
Mini
if you've ever
Metro.
played that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, or like the Go games, Hitman Go, Lara Croft Go, like these games that can use a very simple look and a very simple input scheme, but that can have a lot of depth to them. And more importantly, games that are sort of really well scoped for small teams. Like a big part of choosing to work on a game like Cubism was that it felt like it was a small enough scope that I could work on it in my spare time. At the time, I was working at that startup that I really enjoyed working at, so I knew that if I was going to work on a project on the side, it better be something small. And something that was sort of manageable. So it sort of really came out of that fascination with like mobile minimal design in mobile games and sort of what that could mean in VR games. And I was just wondering, okay, what's a simple gameplay that doesn't require a lot of complexity in terms of the environment or the mechanics that I can implement and that really benefits from being in VR. And this sort of puzzle, which I mean, it has been around for a while, right? These if anybody, it's very recognizable as like these wooden puzzles that
yeah.
people might
The
know
the
that you put
blocks.
together to form
Yeah,
a cube. Yeah, exactly. So it's that, but in VR, and it just seems to fit very well for the medium because you really benefit from having the spatial insight of the three dimensional shapes to
yeah,
get to the solution, and you really benefit from having tracked controllers or hands to actually have
yeah.
the dexterity to solve these things. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, what I thought, of course, I made that connection with the wooden puzzles, but
Mhm.
what's so good about it being in VR is that you can have these odd shapes that don't. A lot of those wooden puzzles have to be like a box or
Right.
something that you can quickly kind of go, oh, it perfectly fits together. Whereas this, you can have weird shapes. You can suspend a piece at the bottom of it and another at the top, and then kind of move it and look around,
Exactly.
which is
Yeah.
really it lets you do more than you can do in real life because you don't have those limitations, which is really fun. Um, so this was 2017 that you started the concept of this and started work on this, is that right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's
So,
right. I made a first prototype over a weekend, basically. So.
mhm. And Quest was probably like, did you have any platforms in mind at that point? Did you have a headset? What were you looking at?
Mhm. Yeah, so I mainly had a Vive at home, so it's
Yeah,
that old of a game. So the
yeah,
first
yeah,
platform I developed it for was the Vive, and then I brought in
yeah.
Rift support. I was lucky enough to be working at that startup, the VR enterprise startup.
Right.
So they had a bunch of headsets also, so it really gave me a lot of access to the new headsets as they came out.
Yeah.
And also the Quests. First, there was the Santa Cruz prototype, and we had one of those in the office. So I was
Hmm.
lucky enough to sort of have early access to that and to sort of see, okay, what do I need to do to get this to run on the Quest?
Yeah.
So I had a pretty early on build. I think as early as like late 2018, I had
Yeah. Okay.
basically a running Santa Cruz build.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Mm. I only ask because it's such a perfect fit for Quest, especially with I think hand tracking, which
Right.
I imagine you didn't even see as a possibility when you were thinking about the game. But
Right.
it
Yeah.
it's such a perfect fit, and also just being able to. It's one of those great games you can give to anyone, especially with the hands. To have given it to people and been like, "Oh, you just pick up the pieces and fit them in," and they kind of it's intuitive and they get it right.
Yeah.
Um, how much hand tracking or hand or controllers either way? How much did you focus on making the puzzles and the game require almost no explanation? Because it seems like
Right.
anyone could pick it up. Was that a big focus?
Absolutely. I put a lot of effort in that actually, and the game came from being in a state where it was a lot harder to use and learn. Basically, the very first prototype or the very first versions of the game, really, it used basically every button on the controller. You had like a button to grab the
Yeah,
puzzle
right,
specifically. You had a
right.
button specifically to like pull all the pieces together.
Yeah,
And the problem was I was playtesting the game a lot in the early stages, which I think you have to do to like just make sure that the onboarding is good and that people understand the game, and that it's something that resonates with people. But I was playtesting early on mainly with the other developers and like VR enthusiasts and people who play games in general. So I was missing a lot of these sort of UX
mm,
issues early on because if people are comfortable with VR or they're comfortable with playing games in general, they learn these controller mappings pretty quickly. But if people aren't, like it's really a roadblock for them, right? So it actually
yeah,
it took me until I was at this video game expo where there were more families. So people who enjoy games, but then who also bring together, bring along their parents
yeah,
or
yeah,
what have you, and putting those people in the game and seeing them sort of struggle with the control scheme, that really sort of flipped the switch for me. Like, oh, I really need to simplify this. And so from that point on, I did everything I could to make the whole game playable with just the triggers. Which required a few like redesigns. Being able to grab the puzzle just with this sort of force field that's around it, like you
yeah,
can very faintly see it, but there's like an outline around all the puzzles.
yeah.
Like that didn't used to be the case, but that sort of made it that you could use the same button to grab the whole puzzle.
Mm,
Putting the menu underneath the menu, sort of the menu underneath the puzzle. There's like a little diamond here, but if you approach that with your controller, basically you can open up the menu and select whichever puzzle you want to solve. That used to be on the hands, and you used to have to like press a button to open it. So it's one less thing that people need to learn about,
yeah,
and so that just made it that from the start of the game to solving the first puzzle, that became a really fast process, and people basically could get started with their first puzzle within like 10 or 15 seconds of starting the game. And I just found that that really helped a lot with getting people to understand how to play the game and really enjoy it. And that was always a goal of mine, to make sure that it was something that was approachable. Again, being inspired by mobile games that are generally easier to pick up and can maybe be enjoyed by like a broader audience. I think
yeah,
that's something of the appeal of VR too, right? That it should be more intuitive. So I'm
yeah,
very happy to
yeah.
see that for some people that seems to be the case.
And it also has, I think, one of the things that makes it fit so well at the moment is that, as you said, it's got that mobile game like pick up, maybe do a puzzle or two, put it back down,
Hmm.
kind of feel, which suits not just VR at the moment. In that we've still got big kind of bulky headsets that you don't want to be wearing for 3 hours or whatever, but also it helps to be able to pass it around and go, oh here, try
Right.
this. Or I even showed my parents when I was back home recently. I had
Nice.
a video up on the computer and I was kind of going like, oh, you can see what I'm doing with my hands in real life. And they were looking at the screen and they were like, oh, yeah, I get it. You're just like moving the things around. It was very easy to explain. I'm just going to have a look at the comments, see if anyone watching has any questions they'd like, chuck them in the comments. We've got a lovely comment from Sebastian who says, many thanks for your game, Thomas. I've been helping my mum with my father who soon pass away, and Cubism has been that little corner of joy where I can rest and process everything that's going on. That's lovely.
Well, thank you,
Lovely to
Sebastian.
hear. That's a lovely comment. And I can agree with the sentiment because it is, I think, almost contrary to some other VR games. It's very calm.
Mhm.
Um, it's a very calm, relaxing experience for me. I kind of really can lose myself in the game. Um, the other thing I love is the dynamic kind of soundtrack and the way that fades
Mm.
in and fades out. And I love when you get to the last piece, and then
Right.
it knows and it cuts out. That's a really nice touch. Um,
Oh, thank you.
the other thing I wanted to talk about is, how do you figure out what a cubism puzzle is? Like, beyond
Right.
the design of the game itself, how do you actually design these structures and the piece shapes, and kind of go, oh, this is what I'm going to do for this level. This is how I make it harder.
Sure, yeah. So one of the first things, one of the first tools I built when I started working on the game was a level editor in VR.
Yep.
So actually, when I design these puzzles, I'm in VR, basically
Right.
designing the puzzle and playing the game at the same time.
Right. How cool.
Usually,
Okay.
it's still a very buggy editor, and like I know what
Yeah.
the quirks are, so I
Yeah.
can work around it. But I've been chipping away at it, trying to make it a little bit better. And at some point, I do hope to have like a local version of this editor that people can also play around with. Um, but my approach basically is usually I start with the shape of the puzzle. Like the puzzles are sort of categorized in sort of shape languages across the
Yep.
stages of the game. So usually it starts with the shape, and then I start filling it in with pieces. So like I try to make the puzzles in such a way that you can approach them with some reason, so that you don't just have to trial and error your way through it.
Mm.
So there are like certain tricks that I know I can design for, where maybe there's one or two pieces that can only go in like several spots of the puzzle, so
Yeah.
it gives like a starting point. And I know that like there are certain things in a puzzle that can bring complexity, like if there's a limited number of symmetries in the puzzle shape or in the piece shape, then it becomes a lot harder to sort of do these mental rotations when you're sort of placing the pieces into the puzzle.
Yep.
But one of the hard things I had to learn as I was like playtesting the game is that it's really, no matter how much you design, like it's really hard to predict how difficult a puzzle is. So
Yeah.
playtesting puzzles with a lot of people and sort of looking at data specifically has been really, really helpful.
Yep.
And sort of, getting a wider range of data of multiple people playing, because also people with different skill sets will have different levels of success with puzzles. So it's really the only like good way to get an idea of how difficult or how easy a puzzle is in the end of the day.
Yeah. That's super interesting because um, at the moment, for those watching, there's a kind of a playtest, or it's pretty much over now, right? This is the last week, I think.
Yeah. This is the last week, exactly.
Yeah. So the plan is to release some more DLC levels, and there was signups available for playtesting if you want to try the levels out, which I've been doing, and I know others have been doing as well. It's been a really fun experience to see different things being tried and see how things work. And of course, you also send out like some data at the end, where you're like at the end of each week, you can look at the kind of completion rate. I've looked at it a few weeks. It's very interesting to see the ones that I found difficult or easy, or even the ones that you kind of categorized as normal or easy. And I would find like the second one in the progression for that week much harder than the next one, or things were
Right.
completely unexpected. And I thought it was super interesting to look at the stats. Also interesting to look at how the completion time for hands was always like a little bit longer, which I guess you would expect.
Right.
But it's
Yes,
interesting
exactly.
to think of that it's taking longer. It's not
You should
significant,
also
but yeah. Go on.
right.
Sorry.
Sorry. There's less data in these playtests, obviously. So every result I need to take with a grain of
Yeah.
salt. But it's been very interesting to see the main campaign of the game, which now has like a lot of data. So looking at those times, it becomes a lot more accurate. And it's been interesting to see that average playtime for the later puzzles in the game with hands is pretty much similar to controls.
Right.
But people seem to take
Get used
less
to it.
moves to solve the puzzle with hands than with controllers. So maybe
That's
because
very
it's a bit
interesting.
slower in gameplay, it's a bit more reasoned when people
Yeah,
play with
you
hands.
stop
I'm
and
not sure.
think about things a bit more. I guess that makes sense, because when I'm playing with controllers, I quickly kind of like, chuck things around. Whereas,
Right.
yeah, hands, you kind of have to be more measured, I guess. Oh, that's interesting. With these new DLC levels, how did you approach them in terms of like the difference of the DLC levels against the like main campaign? Were you aiming to do something different? Like, what was the kind of, I guess, idea for doing it, and
Sure.
how are you thinking about kind of, I guess, differentiating it?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that a lot of people seem to ask is to have more levels, and to that the game is the 60 levels in the game is kind of short. So DLC seem to be like the best way to give people more puzzles to play. Um, There is I do want to sort of differentiate these levels a bit visually from the main campaign, and I'm working on some things for that. It's still a work in progress, so I'm not gonna announce anything
Yeah,
on that
yeah,
just yet.
yeah,
But hopefully, they're gonna have a bit of a different look from the main campaign to differentiate them. But they will play very similar to the puzzles in the main campaign. As you know, yes, you've been
yeah,
testing them, so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Do you know roughly when we might expect them, or how many levels to expect?
Sure. Yeah. So it's going to be a DLC of 30 puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
And much like the campaign, sort of, there's going to be a song that's sort of tied to the puzzles, specific to the DLC, which maybe to briefly explain to people who maybe haven't played the game, every puzzle in the game basically has piano notes tied to the puzzle pieces. And so when you solve a puzzle, you hear a piano chord. And then basically all the sequence of puzzles that you solve form a song, basically. So the main campaign is basically this big song that you sort of unlock as you play it. And the DLC will have a song of its own that you sort of unlock as you play the puzzles
Mm,
as well.
yeah, right. We've got some questions
Mm-hmm.
from the audience. Fabio says, any plans for an AR version of Cubism? Is that
Uh,
Have you announced that, or is there something? Am I misremembering? Is there any AR thing on the horizon?
It's something that I hope to be able to do at some point, and I'm definitely like trying to take little steps to make the game ready for that.
Yeah.
Hand tracking is one thing. Like I'm assuming that an AR headset in the future will be hand tracked. So adding hand tracking support is sort of a little stepping stone to that. Um, I'm playing around with some things. The North Star folks were kind enough to send me a headset, and I've been playing around with it a little bit. I haven't gotten super far with it yet, but it's a cool first step to see what designing for AR would look like. Fabio, if I'm not mistaken, maybe that's the developer of Reality Mixer, or at least he has the same name as the developer of Reality
It's
Mixer. But it's a really
Fabio
cool.
Della Antonio, if that
That's
helps.
him. Yeah,
Yeah, there you go.
he makes a really cool app on iOS. So if you have an iPad or an iPhone, it basically allows you to very easily do mixed reality footage with VR games. And so one thing that we've been trying out with his app is actually faking AR. So basically, if you make the background of any game like black, you can easily sort of cut it
Mm,
out. And so when you do mixed reality, you can just overlay the puzzle over the real world, and then have a look that sort of looks a bit like mixed reality, and it gives an idea of what it might look like in the future to play something like that. And he's
yeah,
been
right.
really cool, like getting feedback in how to make these sort of fake AR mixed reality working. So he's been doing really cool work with his app.
Yeah, cool. Um, we've got another question from Curie. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Did you discover something really unexpected during playtesting? Maybe something that made you reconsider the direction of the puzzles?
Yeah, absolutely. There's like sometimes you design a puzzle and you're very proud of it, like just how it looks or how it plays. But then playtesting, it's always like a hard truth that you have to like accept. So if a puzzle was too hard, there are some puzzles that I had to cut from the main campaign, and also now with the DLC that I was kind of fond of, but that I know that I have to cut because they're either too hard too early or they're too easy for where they're going to be, sort of where they're going to land in the DLC or in the campaign. So learning like which puzzles are too hard or too easy is always something that kind of surprises me. Like sometimes I think a puzzle will be really easy, but then you know there's only 20% of people who solve it or something like this. So
Yeah.
it's uh, it's always a hard truth, but it's absolutely necessary to sort of know what to go with. So
It must be hard too before you get any playtesting, and it's just because it's your game. So if you're,
right,
and because you built the puzzle, you know how it goes together. It's almost like it'd be very hard to even
yeah.
get any kind of, um,
Well, sometimes I don't, and that's usually like a good sign if I'm trying to go for a hard one. Like, I'll design a puzzle, and then usually the next day I'll pick it up and see like where I can figure it out. And I've definitely had
yeah,
cases where I just absolutely couldn't, and
yeah,
that's like usually a good sign. And then
yeah,
usually I try to put some time in it and see if I can reason my way through it, and then I know whether or not I might have a good or bad like hard puzzle. But without playtesting, there's no way to really be sure.
yeah, yeah. Nice. We've got a shout out from Jonathan Obo, who says, "Hey, it's Thomas. Thank you so much for an awesome game in Cubism and for responding to his weekly emails." And then
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
Mosaic, who says, "Are there any other plans to add additional mechanics beyond fitting the puzzle pieces to a cube?" And then in another comment, they've said, "Speed running, speed puzzle racing against someone else live may be fun."
um, First, thank you to Jonathan. He's been playtesting as well, and for his feedback. Thank you. So having something like speedrunning or leaderboards is always something that's been in the back of my mind, but it's always something that I've sort of consciously shied away from in this game, just because part of the design of the game is to be a relaxing game and a relaxing experience, and I wouldn't want any of the mechanics to sort of pressure you into needing to find a solution. Like, I want people to feel comfortable skipping puzzles or letting a puzzle be for a bit and coming back to it, and not feeling like a need to do something fast. Or so I think not having leaderboards or sort of timers can help with that. It could be interesting at some point in the future to have a multiplayer version of this or something where you can competitively solve a puzzle, but I don't think that's within the scope of this game. But
yeah, you can make a separate Cubism Battle Royale with 100 Cubism players.
That's it, like Tetris 99. Cubism.
Yeah, exactly.
99. Yeah. Maybe at some point in the future.
Maybe. Jonathan also said any 2 or 4 player multiplayer gameplay example, seeing who could be the quickest, which you've just kind of answered. So there you go. Got 2 birds, 1 stone. Yeah, okay. Well, let me have a look at my questions here. Is there anything else that you've got planned, either for Cubism beyond the DLC or other projects that you've got on the horizon that you want to talk about?
I mean, it's a bit early. Like, I do have some ideas of next projects that I would want to work on, but ideas without any execution, I don't think.
Yeah, you're still chewing on them.
I'm looking forward to the time that I have time to prototype these new ideas, and hopefully, if I have something, then I'll be happy to share.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Is this what you're doing full time now? Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah. So I am working full time on Cubism now, mainly putting time in the DLC. But I've been also sort of chipping away at the level editor, as I was saying. So at some point, I would hope to have a local level editor, so people can start designing their own puzzles. And there's some like small quality of life updates that I would like to try to get out. 60 hertz hand tracking obviously is a big performance goal that might still require a lot of effort, but hopefully I can achieve it. I'm also looking at new platforms as well. I have the Pico Neo development kit here, so hopefully I'll be able to bring it to new platforms like that as well at some point in the future.
Cool. Another quick question. Have you tried procedurally generating puzzles? That's an interesting one.
I have not. I do very much like design them by hand, just to make sure that they're approachable and that there's like that there's a way to reason through the puzzles. I'm not sure that it's impossible to do that. And one of the updates, actually the first update after the game released, was support for modding puzzles. So I actually published the file format that makes up puzzles, which is basically just a text file with a bunch of coordinates, right? And you can sort of sideload these into the game and then play them. So if anybody wants to have a crack at that, like, I would love to see that. If they can like generate puzzles through this file format, for sure.
That'd be very cool. Another is related to what we've been talking about is Jonathan saying, what about players creating their own puzzles they could submit? So that's what I was going to follow up to with the level editor. When you say a local level editor, do you mean that it would be in the app and similar to other games, the level editor section someone can go into and play and then maybe upload a level online? Is that kind of in the scope?
Well, the scope that I'm looking at right now is to basically have a local level editor where you can design these puzzles, play them locally, but then sort of exchange them through side loading. So kind of similar to how you would mod levels for Beat Saber and sort of load them onto the quest. It's mainly because like this sort of mod support that I launched as a first update was sort of to test the waters, and I haven't seen too much people sort of engage with that. So I'm a little modest about building out a whole backend infrastructure for people to share puzzles before I know that like that's actually something that a sizable number of people want to do. So I think launching a local level editor first to sort of test the waters a bit there probably makes a bit more sense.
Right. Okay. So you're saying if we want a Cubism level editor, an online sharing tool, people who are watching you to go and figure out how to mod Cubism first and make
There
their
you
own
go.
levels. So there you
Go
go.
do
You heard it here.
it.
Everyone go do that, and then we'll have a Cubism level editor down the track. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I think that's pretty much everything I had to ask you about. It's been great to talk to you. Huge fan of the game. But thank you for coming in. Thank you for making a fantastic game and sharing your kind of thought process and design process on it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on, and it's been really fascinating to see the studio from the inside. So
Yes, you've been in the inside of the studio now. You've seen the behind the scenes. All right. Thanks, everyone.
nice.
We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.